An 8-year-old girl in a torn pink coat and no gloves runs sobbing through a Boston blizzard at 11:16 p.m., snow plastering her dark hair to her face, lips turning blue, chased by a man in a black coat 30 feet behind her. Mia Reynolds didn't think. She moved. The homeless woman was asleep in her freezing Honda Civic outside the closed laundromat, window cracked because the door lock had been broken for 8 months. The seat reclined just enough to stretch her 5'4" frame, and she'd pulled her threadbare jacket across her body like a funeral shroud. Her breath came in small clouds that froze against the windshield. Then the screaming started. A child's scream cuts through winter like a blade wrapped in ice. Not the crying of a tired kid. The sound of terror. Of being hunted. Mia's eyes snapped open. She didn't hesitate. Didn't calculate. Didn't think about whether this was her problem or anyone else's responsibility. She moved like someone who had learned long ago that hesitation kills. The car door stuck. It always did. She hit it with her shoulder and it swung open, cold air stabbing into her chest like 1,000 needles. Her bare feet found the frozen pavement. She'd kicked off her shoes hours ago to save warmth, and she was already running toward the sound before her brain caught up with her body. The girl was 40 feet away, running between the dark storefronts of Northside Street, her pink coat impossibly bright against the white wall of falling snow. Behind her, a man in an expensive black wool coat moved with terrible purpose. Not running. Walking. Like he knew she had nowhere to go. Mia didn't think. She stepped directly into the girl's path and scooped her up, one arm around the child's waist, and kept moving. The man stopped. For one eternal second, their eyes met through the blizzard. His face was hard. Weathered. The kind of face that had learned early that cruelty was a tool. He watched Mia carry the child into the 24-hour diner 3 doors down. The warmth hit like a physical assault. Mia didn't look back. She pushed through the glass door, the bell above it chiming sharp and clear, and kept walking toward the far booth. The diner was nearly empty. A cook in white stood behind the counter, reading something on his phone. An old man sat at the counter with coffee and a newspaper that hadn't been updated since Thursday. They both looked up. The man in the black coat appeared at the window. He stared through the glass for a breath. 2. Then he turned and dissolved back into the blizzard. Mia's hands were shaking. The girl, Emma, though Mia didn't know that yet, was trembling against her coat. Not just cold. Pure fear. Her lips had a blue undertone, her eyes unfocused, her dark hair frozen stiff against her face. "You're safe," Mia said, and the words came out steady even though her entire body was vibrating like an engine about to crack. "You're safe now. I promise." Emma didn't speak. Just shook. Mia guided her into the booth, pulling her close. The girl was so small. Couldn't have been more than 70 pounds, if that. Mia rubbed her arms through the thin pink coat, friction creating heat the way her own mother had done when Mia was small and the house ran out of heating oil in January. "Hey!" The waitress appeared with 2 mugs of coffee, looking between them with that specific mixture of hospitality and wariness that Bostonians perfected in winter. "You folks okay?" "Hot chocolate," Mia said. 2. "And bring some napkins. Please." The waitress nodded and disappeared. Mia pulled Emma closer and waited. The girl's breathing gradually slowed. The trembling continued but became less violent, more like the aftershocks following an earthquake. She still hadn't spoken. Mia reached into the pocket of her jacket, the same threadbare brown jacket she'd owned for 6 years, and pulled out the only thing she had. A photograph, worn soft from constant handling. Her late husband, Marcus. He'd been dead for 3 years, but she carried him with her the way other people carried hope. Emma looked at the photo with hollow eyes. "Who is that?" The girl's voice came out like a whisper wrapped in glass. "His name was Marcus. He was my husband. He loved people like we love you right now. He protected them." Mia's voice caught just slightly. "He's not here anymore." But sometimes when I'm scared, I look at his face and I remember that some people are kind. That kindness is real. The hot chocolate arrived. The waitress set it down without comment, then withdrew to give them space. The steam rose from the cup in delicate spirals, warming the air between them. Emma reached out and wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug. That's when Mia's fingers trembled open and the photo slipped from her grip. It landed on the vinyl booth seat, face up. Marcus looked up at her with that half-smile he'd perfected over 15 years of loving her. The smile that said, "I know you're broken, and I love you anyway." Emma picked it up and held it with the reverence of someone holding something sacred. "He has a kind face." He did. 3 blocks away, in the back of a black Mercedes S-Class that cost more than a small house, Luca Calabrese watched his daughter's face on a phone screen. The video was coming from the diner's security camera, fed directly to his lieutenant's phone. Crystal clear. 8-year-old Emma, shaking in a booth, wrapped in the jacket of a woman he'd never seen before. A woman who had just pulled his daughter from the darkness like someone pulling a drowning child from a frozen river. His jaw clenched. The scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a souvenir from his father, who had learned violence from his father before him, pulled tight across his skin. "Boss, we got her," Vinny said from the driver's seat. Vinny had worked for Luca for 11 years, and in those 11 years he had learned to recognize the difference between Luca's cold anger and Luca's dangerous anger. This was the dangerous kind. The kind that ended with bodies in the harbor. "She's at the Northside Diner. The woman just pulled her inside 2 minutes ago. Security team is 3 blocks out." Luca didn't move. He watched the screen. The strange woman in the borrowed from a thrift store brown jacket was using a napkin to wipe the snow from Emma's face with a tenderness that made something heavy and dangerous stir in his chest. "Who let my daughter get 15 blocks from the house?" His voice was quiet. Absolutely level. Which made it worse. Who was supposed to be watching her? Her nanny called in sick. On the phone when we were supposed to pick her up. We're still running her down. She turned off her phone and 15 blocks, Luca said again. In a blizzard. With a man we haven't identified yet. But what he didn't say was that he recognized something in the way this stranger moved. No calculation. No hesitation. Just pure instinct to save a child she didn't know from a danger she couldn't possibly have understood. In 39 years, Luca had known 1,000 people. Business partners. Soldiers. Lieutenants. Lawyers who cost $50,000 a month. And he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone move like that. Like the child mattered more than survival. "Get me there," he said. The car accelerated into the Boston night. Mia didn't know what time it was when the door to the diner opened. She'd stopped wearing a watch 3 years ago, kept selling pieces of her life to cover things that mattered more. Emma had drunk half her hot chocolate and eaten 2 pieces of toast that the waitress brought without being asked. The girl still hadn't spoken much, but her lips had regained some color. The cold came in first. That sharp Massachusetts winter cold that made the warm air recoil. Then the men. 3 of them. Black suits that cost more than everything Mia owned. Expensive coats. Gold watches visible on their wrists. The kind of men who didn't go to diners like this. The kind of men who owned places like this, who existed on different planes entirely. The man in front was taller than the others. 6'1", maybe 6'2". Broad-shouldered. Dark hair silvered at the temples. His face was all angles and intensity, and he had one of those scars that told a story nobody wanted to hear. He moved the way dangerous things move, slowly, deliberately, each muscle controlled. His eyes found Emma first. Then they found Mia. Something in that moment crystallized. Something shifted in the air like a door opening onto a room she didn't know existed. "Emma," the man said, and his voice was like thunder wrapped in velvet. "Come here." Emma moved immediately. No hesitation. She knew him. She knew she was safe with him. The girl slid out of the booth and ran to him, and he knelt down, all 6 feet of him, kneeling, to wrap her in his arms. That's when Mia understood. This was her father. This beautiful, terrifying man was Emma's father. He held his daughter like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. Like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Mia watched his shoulders shake once, just once, and then the moment passed and he stood, Emma clinging to him like she could absorb him into her skin. His eyes came back to Mia. "What's your name?" His voice had changed. The thunder was gone. Replaced by something else. Something that made her think of knives and winter and promises that cut both ways. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia Reynolds. Luca Calabrese." He said his name like it was supposed to mean something. And by the way the other men in the diner stiffened, by the way the cook disappeared into the kitchen without being told to, it clearly did. "You saved my daughter." Mia couldn't find words. Couldn't find the shape of what had happened. "I heard her. I just moved." "You saved her," he said again, and in that moment, Mia Reynolds had no idea that her entire life was about to change. That this man, this impossible man, would spend the next months unraveling the truth of who she was. That his empire would become her fortress. That she would learn what it meant to be seen by someone who could move mountains. But that was all still coming. For now, there was just the diner. The warmth. The man holding his daughter like she was made of light. And Mia, trembling, with $34 left to her name and a photo of her dead husband in a borrowed jacket, watching something dangerous and beautiful begin. Rewind. Let us go back to the beginning. To the woman with $34 and a car that wouldn't start. To the man who owned half of Boston but couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. To a night that would change everything. The gas station bathroom smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. Mia Reynolds stood at the sink at 6:15 in the morning, her face still swollen from crying, and she washed her hands for the 3rd time because the soap was free and she had nowhere else to be. The fluorescent light hummed above her head like a dying insect, casting everything in a sickly white glow. Her backpack sat on the sink beside the paper towel dispenser, everything she owned in the world fit inside it. A change of clothes. 2 pairs of socks with holes in the heels. A toothbrush she'd stolen from a hotel 6 months ago. And the photograph. She pulled it out now, the way she did every morning, and looked at Michael's face. 32 years old in the photo, taken 6 years ago before the cancer came and took him piece by piece. Before he stopped smiling. Before he stopped breathing. He wore a Boston Red Sox hat and a grin that could light up a parking garage. Mia pressed her thumb against his cheek, a ritual she performed whether it made sense or not. "I'm still trying, baby," she whispered to his laminated face. "I'm still trying." The gas station attendant watched her through the mirror with the kind of pity that felt worse than indifference. She'd seen him looking at her worn jeans, her layered shirts, the way she'd changed clothes in the bathroom stall because she had nowhere else to change. His name tag read Derek and he had soft eyes that made her want to disappear. She tucked the photo back into her wallet, next to the crumpled foreclosure notice she couldn't bring herself to throw away. $34. That was what remained after gas, after the parking lot she'd slept in 3 nights ago, after the cheapest food she could find. $34 to last 3 more days until the grocery store interview, until the paycheck that might never come. She counted it 3 times while Derek looked away, pretending he hadn't seen her desperation. 3 times, the bills whispered their inadequacy. 110. 3 ones. 2 fives. A quarter, 14 dimes, 4 pennies. $34 and a photograph of a dead man. The interview was at a supermart on Commonwealth Avenue, 15 minutes away if the car started. It wouldn't. The engine turned over once, twice, then settled into a grinding silence that meant another week without a mechanic, another miracle she couldn't afford. She sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel and let herself cry for exactly 2 minutes. She set the limit because if she didn't, she might never stop. At the 2-minute mark, she wiped her eyes on her sleeve and tried the ignition again. It started on the 4th attempt, coughing like an old man waking up from a nightmare. The supermarket manager was named Bradley and he wore his khakis like armor. He'd interviewed her 3 times in the past 2 months. She'd watched his eyes track across her application each time, looking for a permanent address, a phone number that didn't disconnect, references from people who still knew her name. She had none of those things. What she had was a willingness to work 70 hours a week and hands that knew how to stock shelves and a desperation that made her reliable because there was no backup plan. There was only forward. "I appreciate you coming in," Bradley said, and those words meant no. They meant her application sat in a pile with 1,000 other applications from people with actual addresses, people who belonged somewhere. When she walked back to her car, there was a parking ticket under the windshield wiper. $75. The words blurred in front of her eyes. $75 for parking in an abandoned lot that nobody owned, $75 she didn't have, $75 that meant she could either eat for the next 5 days or pay the city of Boston to breathe. She sat in the driver's seat and held the ticket in both hands and thought about Michael. He would have known what to do. He would have made a joke. He would have held her hand and told her something true about surviving. Instead, she sat alone. 3 miles away, on the 23rd floor of a glass building that reflected the winter sky, Luca Calabrese received a phone call that turned his blood to ice. His office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of space that swallowed sound. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the north end, and snow had begun to fall in thick, determined flakes. The report sat in front of him, numbers that mattered, shipments that moved, money that flowed through Boston like blood through a heart he didn't really have anymore. Vinny and Enzo stood by the desk, both men in suits that cost more than a year of Mia Reynolds' rent, both men built like violence with suits stretched over it. Luca was talking about port acquisitions when the phone rang. His personal phone. The number that almost no one had. Sophia's voice came through like a knife. "He's gone. Emma's gone. She took her coat but not her phone and I can't find her anywhere. She's been gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Luca, and I don't know where she is." The report papers slipped from his hands. They scattered across the mahogany desk like birds fleeing a burning building. Luca's face went absolutely still, the way a face goes still when something essential breaks inside of it. He stood. The chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Which direction did she go?" His voice had become something carved from granite. "I don't know. She was upset. She said she didn't want to be there anymore and I turned around and she was gone. She's 8, Luca. She's 8 and it's snowing and she doesn't have her phone." He was already moving, already pulling on his coat, the cashmere one that cost more than 3 months of Mia's rent. The north end was brutal in winter. The streets froze. The wind came off the harbor like broken glass. An 8-year-old girl in a winter coat wasn't nearly warm enough. "Find her," he said to Vinny and Enzo. The words weren't a request. They were a law of physics, a force that superseded mercy. "Every man we have. Every camera in the network. I want to know where she is in the next 5 minutes." Vinny was already on his radio. 3 minutes later, they had a hit from a bodega camera on Salem Street, Emma's small figure visible in her pink coat, running. Running away from her mother's house, deeper into the city, toward something or away from everything. The timestamp read 2:02 p.m. The Mercedes moved through Boston traffic like a predator through tall grass. Vinny drove while Luca sat in the back, his hands gripping the phone hard enough to crack the screen. On the phone, a technician pulled security feeds from Luca's network, and he had a network that would make government surveillance operations weep with envy. Every camera he'd installed on every building he owned or controlled or had simply decided belonged to him. A map of the city made visible through 1,000 watching eyes. "Boss," Enzo's voice came through the radio. "We've got her on Hanover. 2 minutes ago. Pink coat, running toward the harbor. 2 minutes. She could be anywhere in 2 minutes." The snow was falling harder now. Visibility down to 3 blocks. Luca's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth might break. He didn't speak. His hands gripped his phone until it developed a spiderweb fracture across the glass. "Every man we have looking." His voice was different now. Thinner. Like something essential had been extracted from it. "Every single man, boss," Vinny confirmed. "Every camera. Every street. We'll find her." But Vinny didn't know what Luca knew. He didn't know about the closed-off closet in a house in Connecticut, the darkness, the 8-year-old boy locked inside screaming until his voice broke. He didn't know that Luca had built his entire empire on a single promise made to himself in that darkness: no child would ever feel what he had felt. No child under his protection would ever disappear. And yet here was Emma, out in the snow, running from her mother's house, becoming a ghost in the blizzard. The Mercedes turned onto Hanover Street at 2:51 p.m. The snow swallowed the city whole. Meanwhile, on the other side of Boston, Mia Reynolds sat in her car with a parking ticket in her lap and made a decision. The supermarket interview had ended at 1:15. The car had finally started at 1:34. She had driven the streets for an hour, thinking about nothing, everything, the way survival was just a series of small decisions strung together like pearls on a rope. She had $34. She had a car that worked sometimes. She had a photo of a dead husband and a job interview tomorrow morning that would probably end the same way this one had. The diner district was 7 blocks away, cheaper parking, better chance of finding work. There was a diner there, Rose's, where the manager might remember her from 6 months ago when she'd washed dishes. She could park near there, sleep in the car, be ready for the interviews that started at 7 a.m. The snow was getting worse. Wind rattled the windows. She turned the ignition and the engine caught and held, and she pulled out of the parking lot just as Luca Calabrese's crew spread across Boston like a net closing around something that had already slipped through the holes. The first snow fell like a curtain descending. Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths were converging. Neither of them knew that in exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes, everything would change. The parking lot was empty except for her car and the falling snow. Mia Reynolds sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, watching ice crystals form on the windshield in geometric patterns. The supermarket manager had looked at her resume for exactly 47 seconds before handing it back. "We're not hiring right now," he'd said. "Try again next month." She had $34 in her checking account. $34. The number sat in her mind like a stone in water, heavy and immovable. 2 weeks of interviews. 2 weeks of rejection. The car needed oil. Her shoes had a hole in the left sole. The photo of Michael, her husband, dead for years now, was tucked into the sun visor, and she didn't let herself look at it on days like this because looking made the breathing harder. The Northside Diner was 7 blocks away. Cheaper parking there. The manager, Rosie, had been kind 6 months ago when Mia washed dishes for cash. Maybe kindness could be repeated. The snow fell heavier as she drove. Wind rattled the windows like something trying to get in. Route 93 was already slick. Brake lights bloomed red in the distance, but Mia kept her speed steady, her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, her mind counting the things she had to count: money, days, how long the car had left, how much longer she could keep doing this. She didn't know that across the city, a black Mercedes was cutting through traffic at precisely the moment a small girl in a pink coat was running barefoot through an alley behind her mother's house, choking on tears and terror. She didn't know that the most dangerous man in Boston was about to walk into a diner at exactly the moment she pulled into its parking lot. She didn't know that her life was approximately 1 hour away from breaking open. Mia parked near the back entrance of Rose's, killed the engine, and sat in the dark. The clock on the dashboard read 2:36 p.m. Snow accumulated on the windshield. She pulled her jacket tighter, the same grey jacket she'd worn for 3 winters, thin now, the lining coming apart at the seams, and practiced her smile for the interview that might not happen. Inside the diner, the smell of grease and coffee hung in the air like a familiar prayer. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. A counter with swiveling stools faced the kitchen. Two elderly men nursed cups of coffee. A young mother with a stroller sat near the front. Rosie was behind the register, and she looked up when the bell above the door chimed. Mia almost didn't turn around when the next bell chimed. Almost didn't register the sudden silence that fell across the room like a blade. Luca Calabrese entered the diner the way other men entered boardrooms. He moved through the space and it reorganized itself around him. 6'3", broad through the shoulders, his black wool coat falling to his knees, the collar lined with cashmere that cost more than Mia's monthly rent used to be. His hair was dark, expensively cut, and there was a silver watch on his left wrist that caught the fluorescent light. But it was his face that made people look away, sharp cheekbones, a scar running from his left eye to his jaw like a white line drawn by something violent, and eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm. Vinny and Enzo flanked him, both in charcoal suits, both with the particular stillness of men trained to listen more than speak. Behind them, a third man carried a small child wrapped in a blanket. Emma Calabrese was 7 years old with dark curls and her father's severe mouth. She was shaking. The diner froze. Everyone knew who Luca Calabrese was. This was his city. These streets answered to him. And yet in 5 years, he had never set foot in Rose's diner. His eyes moved across the room with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. He registered the old men, the young mother, the owner behind the counter. He registered Mia Reynolds sitting in a corner booth, her grey jacket thin as tissue paper, her blonde hair loose and tangled from the wind, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she was trying to make last an hour. And then he looked at his daughter. Emma's eyes were red from crying. Her pink coat was soaking wet. There was snow in her hair and her feet were bare, the skin already turning purple at the edges. Emma. Luca's voice was barely a sound, but it moved through the diner like current through water. He crossed the space in 3 strides and the man holding her lowered her down. She ran into his arms and he caught her, his face breaking open for exactly 3 seconds before he assembled it back together, checking her temple, her fingers, her ribs, confirming she was real and whole and breathing. Over Emma's shoulder, his eyes found Mia. "You're the one," he said. It wasn't a question. Mia stood slowly, her legs uncertain. Up close, Luca Calabrese was more frightening than rumors suggested. The scar pulled his face slightly, giving him an expression of permanent anger even when he wasn't angry. He was looking at her the way you look at something invaluable that you almost lost. She was being chased, Mia said quietly. A man in a dark coat. He was following her through the snow. I couldn't leave her. You pulled her into the diner, Luca said. It was in his tone, not a question but a confirmation of fact. Yes. You gave her your jacket. She was freezing. Luca studied her for a moment, and Mia felt the weight of his full attention, which felt like standing in front of a furnace. Behind him, Vinny was whispering something to Enzo, both men's faces showing the shock of recognizing something unprecedented in their boss's expression. What's your name? Luca asked. Mia Reynolds. She didn't elaborate. The truth was that she'd learned not to elaborate. People didn't want a resume of her failures. They wanted answers in 1 syllable if possible. Miss Reynolds, you probably saved my daughter's life tonight. Luca's voice was steady as stone. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them completely and truthfully. Do you understand? Mia nodded. How long have you been living in your car? The diner went absolutely still. Someone's coffee cup clicked against a saucer. The fluorescent lights hummed. 8 months, Mia said. She saw no point in lying. This man already knew. She could see it in his face. He'd already had her investigated, already knew her entire history, already made decisions based on information she hadn't given him. Before that? I worked 3 jobs. My husband had medical bills. After he died, the bills didn't stop. I paid them for as long as I could, and then I couldn't anymore. Luca set Emma down and she immediately pressed against his leg, her small hand gripping his coat. Vinny, Luca said without looking away from Mia. Give her the money. Vinny stepped forward and placed $400 bills on the table next to her coffee cup. The gesture was casual, dismissive, as though he wasn't handing her her entire monthly budget in cash. "I don't want money," Mia said. The words came out faster than she could stop them. "I don't need." "Then what do you need?" Luca's question cut across her refusal like a blade. Mia met his eyes. She thought about the job interviews. The manager who looked at her for 47 seconds. The way people's faces changed when they heard her address was a car registration. "A job," she said. "A place to sleep that isn't my car. To not be invisible anymore." Vinny and Enzo exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years, their boss standing in a diner, speaking to a stranger in the tone of someone making a vow. Luca pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wrote an address in ink. His handwriting was sharp and precise. "Come here tomorrow at noon," he said, and handed it to her. The paper was warm from his hand. "Calabrese's restaurant. We'll talk about what comes next." He looked at his daughter. Emma had stopped shaking. She was watching Mia with a particular intensity of children who recognize something true in another person. "Thank you, Miss Reynolds," Luca said, and the word sounded strange in his mouth, like he was speaking a language he'd never learned properly. "Thank you for my daughter." Then he was gone, walking back out into the snow with Emma's hand in his and Vinny and Enzo moving like shadows beside him. The diner resumed its breathing. The coffee maker hissed. Someone turned on the radio. Mia stared at the $400 bills on the table. She had never held this much money at once in 3 years. Her hand shook as she folded them into her jacket pocket. In the back seat of the black Mercedes, Emma fell asleep against her father's chest while the snow continued to fall. Luca didn't move. He sat with his daughter breathing against him and thought about the moment the call had come through, Emma running into a blizzard, Emma missing, Emma lost somewhere in the white chaos. He thought about the moment he'd seen the diner and recognized the truth that his child was safe because a woman with $34 in her pocket and no food in her stomach had chosen to save her. At 2:04 a.m., Luca lay in his bed and couldn't sleep. He played security footage on the tablet beside him. The diner's camera. The moment Mia pulled Emma through the glass door. The moment she shielded the child with her body. The moment she stopped shaking long enough to comfort a stranger's daughter. He rewound it 6 times. What he saw in her face, the desperation and the courage existing simultaneously, the willingness to risk for someone she'd never met, it reminded him of someone. It took him 3 hours to understand who. It reminded him of himself, at age 9, standing in front of his father's fist and not backing down. At 4:17 a.m., he made a single call. "I need everything," he said. "Every record. Every hospital visit. Every address. Every person who ever hurt Mia Reynolds. I want to know who the men are following her. I want to know their names, their families, their bank accounts. And I want to know who sent them. By sunrise." Vinny's voice came back, already awake and waiting for this call. "We're looking at someone specific." "We're looking at everyone," Luca said. "But yes. There's someone specific. Her name will be in her scars." The line went quiet except for the sound of snow hitting the windows. Luca looked at his sleeping daughter and made another promise to himself: the woman who saved her was going to live in a safe place. She was going to have a door that locked. She was going to know what it meant to be protected. By tomorrow at noon, everything would change. But what she didn't know, what Mia Reynolds had no way of understanding as she sat in her cold car, holding $400 and a napkin with an address written in elegant handwriting, was that 300 miles away, a man named Douglas Hale was answering his phone at dawn and learning that the woman who'd escaped him 8 years ago was finally, impossibly, visible again. And this time, he was going to take his time retrieving her. 2 weeks later, the snow came back to Boston like a curse that could not be erased. Mia walked Emma home from school, the child's small hand wrapped in hers, their breath visible in the frozen air like prayers nobody answered. The streets were empty except for the wind that cut through the city with a blade wrapped in ice. Emma chattered about her spelling test, about a boy named Marcus who shared his apple, about colors and clouds and things that mattered in a 7-year-old's perfect world. Then Mia saw him. Douglas Hale stood across the street, his coat dark against the white snow, his smile exactly as she remembered it from every nightmare that had torn her awake in her car. 13 seconds. That's how long their eyes met before her survival instinct, the part of her that had kept her breathing through 8 years of hell, screamed at her to run. She pulled Emma's hand so hard the child cried out. "We're going. Now." "But Mommy, you're hurting." They ran. 3 blocks through the blizzard, Emma's small feet struggling to keep pace, Mia's lungs burning, her phone already in her shaking hand. Her fingers found Luca's number without thinking. "He's here," she gasped into the phone before he could speak. "Douglas. He found me. He was waiting at the school." Luca's voice came back, steady as iron. "Where are you?" "Running toward Hanover Street." "I don't know where to go, I don't know." "The restaurant." "Go directly to the restaurant. Vinny is 2 minutes away. I'm sending him now. You go upstairs to the apartment. You lock every door. You understand me?" "Yes. Yes, I'm running." The line went dead. The restaurant's back entrance was 22 seconds away. Mia ran through the snow with Emma crying, the child's fear mixing with confusion, asking questions Mia couldn't answer. The kitchen door was unlocked, it was always unlocked during the day, and Mia burst through into the warmth and the smell of garlic and tomato sauce and safety. Mario looked up from the stove. He saw her face and said nothing. He simply pointed to the stairs. Mia climbed. Her legs shook so badly she had to grip the railing. Emma cried the entire way, asking why they were running, was someone chasing them, were they going to be okay? Mia didn't answer. She couldn't breathe enough to form words. The apartment door was already unlocked, Luca always left it that way for her now, and Mia pulled Emma inside and locked everything. The deadbolt. The chain. She checked the windows, curtains drawn. She pulled Emma into the corner furthest from the door, away from any sight line, and wrapped the child in her body like a shield. Emma fell asleep from exhaustion and fear, her small face pressed against Mia's chest, her breathing gradually slowing to the rhythm of sleep. Mia did not sleep. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold her phone. She texted Luca, "We're here. We're locked in." The words felt small and useless. His response came in seconds, "I'm 3 minutes away. Do not open the door for anyone but me." Those 3 minutes stretched like decades. When the knock came, 2 solid, measured taps, Mia's entire body went rigid. She recognized that knock. It was not the gentle sound of someone seeking entry. It was the sound of a man who knew he was coming inside regardless. "Mia." Douglas's voice came through the door, smooth and certain. "I know you're in there. Come out and we can talk about this like adults." She pressed her hand over Emma's mouth even though the child was asleep. Her other hand found her phone. The second knock came harder. The door frame cracked slightly. He was testing it, measuring how long before it would give. Then footsteps. Heavy, urgent footsteps. A voice she recognized, "Step away from the door." "Vinny." Douglas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You bringing reinforcements now, Mia? That's cute. That's actually." The door swung inward. Vinny filled the entire frame, his shoulders broad enough to block the light from the hallway. Behind him, 2 more men Mia didn't recognize. "Get out of the building," Vinny said to Douglas. His voice was flat, the voice of a man stating facts to someone who had already lost the ability to argue. "I came to collect what's mine." "The woman, the girl. You've got 10 seconds to be down the stairs and out the back door before things get difficult for you." 8 seconds of silence. Then footsteps descending. Voices in the hallway. An engine starting somewhere in the distance. Vinny stepped into the apartment and closed the door. "He's gone. Luca's on his way." You're safe. Mia couldn't speak. Couldn't move. She just held Emma and shook. Luca arrived 4 minutes later. He took in the scene, Mia in the corner, Emma sleeping, Mia's eyes hollow with a terror that had aged her 10 years in a single afternoon, and his face went completely still. That stillness was more frightening than rage. That stillness was the face of a man making a decision that couldn't be unmade. He knelt in front of her. Look at me. She could barely focus. Her eyes kept darting to the door, to the windows, to the shadows. Mia. Look at me. She forced her gaze to his. His eyes were storm gray, burning with an intensity that should have terrified her but instead felt like the only solid thing in a collapsing world. You're safe. Do you understand me? I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let that man breathe the same air as you again. He is finished. His name is finished. Everything about him is finished. And if you do not believe me, watch what happens next. He stood and walked to the window. Pulled out his phone. Vinny. Get the crew. Full tactical. I want that warehouse in Charlestown surrounded and ready to move within the hour. Douglas Hale is there. Margaret Harrington is likely there. I want every victim we can document. I want every transaction recorded. I want this wrapped so tight the FBI can't do anything but prosecute. His voice was calm, which made it infinitely more dangerous. And Vinny? He reaches for a weapon, you disarm him. He runs, you catch him. Nobody dies. I want him alive to watch his entire world collapse. The phone conversation lasted 45 seconds. Then Luca turned back to Mia. I need you to do something for me. She nodded, still unable to speak. I need you to sit with Emma. I need you to be right here when she wakes up. I need you to tell her that she's safe, and that you will always be safe, because that's the truth now. Can you do that? Where are you going? The words came out broken. I'm going to make sure he never finds you again. He left. The apartment fell silent except for the sound of wind against the windows, the city outside muffled beneath 2 feet of snow. Hours passed. Emma woke crying, calling for her father. Mia held her, rocking her, saying nothing because there were no words that could explain the fear or the safety existing in the same moment. At 3 in the morning, Mia left Emma sleeping and stepped out onto the balcony. The blizzard had returned with a violence that made her question whether she was awake or trapped in some fever dream. Snow fell so heavy she could barely see the street below, just white and wind and cold so absolute it felt like a living thing trying to erase her from existence. She gripped the railing. Her knuckles turned white, then numb. 8 years. 8 years of being hunted, of fighting, of believing that someday Douglas would find her and drag her back into the dark. 8 years of scars on her skin and scars in her mind that had names and dates and specific locations where the pain had been worst. The wind cut through her thin jacket like a blade. Frost formed on her lips. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps that didn't fill her lungs. She thought about Michael. Her husband. The one person who had loved her without condition, without asking her to be something she wasn't. He was dead because his heart had given out at 42, and she had spent the last 8 years surviving for no reason except that survival was what her body did. She thought about the women Douglas was still keeping. The ones Margaret Harrington was recruiting from shelters and churches. The ones who would go through the same hell Mia had endured unless someone was strong enough to break it. The metal railing was so cold it burned. She could let go. The storm would take her, and Emma would be fine because Luca would protect her, and the world would keep spinning, and nobody would remember a homeless woman who hadn't fought hard enough. Her hand started to loosen. Then Emma's voice came from inside the apartment, small and terrified. Mia? Mia, where did you go? One moment. One single moment of a child needing her. One sentence in a voice that still called her Mia instead of mother but would, someday, when the healing was far enough along that Emma could afford tenderness. Mia stepped back from the railing. She slid down against the wall until she was sitting on the frozen balcony, her back against the metal door. And she sobbed. Not from fear anymore, but from the realization that she wanted to live. That there was something in this world worth staying for. The door opened behind her. Luca stepped out onto the balcony in his shirt sleeves, the snow immediately beginning to accumulate on his dark hair, and he sat beside her without speaking. He took off his cashmere coat, the one that cost more than a month of her old salary, and wrapped it around her shoulders. They sat in silence while the blizzard raged. His presence was enough. His refusal to leave her alone on this frozen precipice was everything. "It's done," he finally said. The words were simple. Mia didn't ask for details. She didn't need them yet. At 6:16 a.m., 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the warehouse in Charlestown like ghosts. The doors came off their hinges. Douglas Hale was reaching for the pistol he kept taped beneath the desk when Vinnie crossed the distance between them in 2 seconds and disarmed him, slamming him against the concrete wall so hard the breath left his body. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Douglas gasped, blood running from his mouth. Luca walked through the door, calm and terrifying. "I know exactly who you are. You trafficked women for 12 years. You tortured Mia Reynolds for 8 of them. And you made the mistake of thinking my city was a safe place to hunt." Douglas's face went white. He understood in that moment that he was no longer playing a game he might win. He understood that every violence he had ever inflicted had just found a mirror. He collapsed to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal. "I can pay you. Whatever she told you, she's lying. I can pay you." In the next room, Margaret Harrington stood surrounded by federal agents. She tried to maintain composure, her perfect Boston accent steady even as her world dissolved. "Do you know who I am?" "My family has." "We know exactly who you are," Enzo said. "A human trafficker hiding behind charity galas and a foundation that was really just a recruitment pipeline for victims." Luca stepped closer to her. "FBI is outside. You're both finished." 2 black vehicles pulled up to the warehouse at 7:19 a.m. Douglas Hale was led out in handcuffs, crying, begging officers to let him explain, to let him talk to someone who understood. Agent Reeves didn't even look at him. "You're facing 40 years in federal prison for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. Save it for your lawyer." The news cameras caught everything. Margaret Harrington was led out moments later, her face pale, her reputation crumbling in real time on every Boston news station. Margaret Harrington, prominent philanthropist, arrested this morning on federal charges including human trafficking and conspiracy. Her foundation, which claimed to help at-risk women, allegedly served as a recruitment pipeline for trafficking victims across 3 states. By noon, the story had gone viral. By evening, every network in the country was running it. By the next morning, there were 2.3 million shares across social media, and the hashtag #Justice4MIA was trending nationally. Mia didn't know that yet. She was in the FBI field office, sitting across from Agent Reeves, telling the truth for the first time in 8 years. "I'll tell you everything," she said. Her voice was stronger now. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something that felt like strength. "There were 12 other women. I remember their names. Every single one." For 3 hours, Mia gave a statement that would dismantle the entire trafficking network. She named every place they had held her. Every man who had hurt her. Every transaction she had witnessed. Every threat Douglas had made. When she was done, Agent Reeves slid a folder across the table. "Douglas Hale is facing 40 years minimum in federal prison. Margaret Harrington is facing 35. Because of your testimony, we've identified 17 additional victims and 6 more conspirators. They're all facing charges. You did this. You destroyed them." Mia broke down, but this time from relief. The kind of relief that feels like being able to breathe after drowning. Luca was waiting outside the building when she walked out into the cold morning light. The blizzard had finally cleared. The sky was a pale gray, the snow pristine and white, the city slowly waking to a day where Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington would never hunt anyone again. He took her hand. "It's over," he said. "You're free." Mia looked at their hands together, at the city beyond, at the impossible distance between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. "I don't know how to be free," she whispered. Luca moved closer. "Then we'll learn together." 1 month later, the television in Luca's office glowed with the face of Douglas Hale. The courtroom was silent except for the judge's voice, steady and final, reading the sentence like a prayer for justice. 42 years. No possibility of parole for 25. The camera cut to Douglas being led back to his cell, and the man on screen bore no resemblance to the predator who had hunted Mia for 8 years. Prison had aged him a decade in a month. His shoulders curved inward like a plant deprived of sunlight. His hands trembled as the guards guided him away from the light. Emma sat on Mia's lap, her small body warm against the weight of what she was watching. The girl's eyes were wide, processing without fully understanding. "Are the bad people gone forever?" Emma asked. Mia pulled her closer, breathing in the innocent scent of her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Forever." The television cut to another courtroom, this one filled with cameras and reporters pressing against the gallery. Margaret Harrington sat at the defense table, her designer suit unable to hide the collapse happening beneath it. 38 years. Her sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. The news showed her family leaving the courthouse through a back entrance, their faces turned away, their lawyer releasing a statement about disownment. The woman who had recruited vulnerable girls into hell, who had smiled while counting blood money, was now erased from the only world she had ever known. Her foundation dissolved. Her name now synonymous with evil. The Harrington reputation, built across for generations, shattered in the space of a month. Mia didn't cry watching it. She had cried enough. Instead, she felt something move through her chest, like a door finally closing, like a lock turning, like the sound of a key sliding home in a deadbolt. That evening, Luca sent a message. The restaurant. The private booth. 7 o'clock. Mia dressed carefully in a deep blue dress that Luca had brought her the week before, a dress that fit properly, that didn't smell of other women's desperation. Emma was with Vinny and his wife for the night, the arrangement made without Mia asking, as though Luca had anticipated that she would need this moment alone with him. The city was clear and cold, the blizzard finally broken, the streets lined with snow that had turned to ice in the Boston night. The restaurant was closed to the public. Calabrese's existed in a different world after dark, a world where the tables held only those who belonged, and the kitchen prepared food for men who could afford to leave no trace. But tonight, Luca had arranged for only one table to be set. The private booth in the back corner, the one with the leather banquette and the view of the city lights beyond the windows. A candle burned in the center, and wine waited in a silver bucket sweating condensation. Luca stood when she entered. He was dressed in black, the cashmere coat draped over a chair, his shirt open at the collar to show the small gold chain he always wore. His dark eyes caught the candlelight, and for a moment, Mia could not breathe. They sat across from each other, the table between them a chasm and a bridge all at once. "I have something for you," Luca said. He slid an envelope across the table. The paper was cream-colored and expensive, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Mia opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were keys. Real keys, not digital codes or passwords, but the kind of keys that open doors to homes that belong to people with permanence. A deed followed, printed on official paper, and when she read the address, her breath caught. Cambridge. A house in Cambridge, paid in full, the deed in her name alone. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You can," Luca said. His voice was low, solid like an oath. "You will. You saved my daughter on the worst night of my life. You brought light into this dark place. Let me give you a foundation." Mia stared at the deed, at the numbers that represented a life, at the proof that she existed in ways beyond survival. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already did." Luca leaned forward, and the candlelight moved across the scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone. "The night you pulled Emma out of that blizzard, you saved both of us. I was drowning in my own darkness, convinced I was my father, convinced I would destroy everyone I touched. You showed me that protection and love aren't weaknesses. They're the only things that matter. Mia reached across the table. Her hand found his, and their fingers intertwined like a prayer that had finally been answered. I've done terrible things in my life, Mia. I'm not a good man. His thumb traced the back of her hand. But when I'm with you, I want to be. You saved me on the worst night of my life, Luca. You gave me a reason to stop running. You are a good man. You just needed someone to see it. They sat in silence, hands intertwined across the table, the candle burning between them like a small sun. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the two broken people who had found each other in the wreckage of their separate darknesses. Snow began to fall again, light and deliberate, painting the windows white. 3 days later, Mia moved into the house in Cambridge. The rooms were empty and clean, the walls a pale grey, the floors hardwood that echoed when she walked across them. Emma arrived in the afternoon, carried into the living room by Luca, and she gasped at the space, at the light coming through the windows, at the way her voice sounded when she called out. It's so big, Emma breathed. Luca arrived with Vinny and Enzo, the fearsome lieutenants who had ordered men into darkness now carrying boxes up a narrow staircase. A sofa came next, then beds, then a kitchen table. Emma directed them with the absolute authority of a child who had suddenly gained dominion over her world. No, that couch goes by the window. That one. She pointed. And the bookshelf needs to be in the corner, not the middle. Vinny exchanged a look with Enzo, a look that said, never thought I'd see the day. Which part? Enzo murmured back. The boss in love, or us playing movers? Both, Vinny said. Luca stood in the doorway watching Mia and Emma laugh as they attempted to assemble a bookshelf upside down, and something in his chest shifted like tectonic plates realigning. Peace. This was what peace felt like. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of purpose. Not the void of power, but the weight of love. That night, after everyone had left, after Emma slept in her new room with her new bedding, Mia stood alone in the living room. The lights were on, warm and golden, pushing back the darkness. In her hands was the photograph of Michael, her husband, the man who had loved her in another lifetime. She had carried it for 8 years, and now she placed it on the mantel, not hidden away in a purse or a pocket, but honored in the light. I made it, baby, she whispered to the image. I finally made it. She paused, feeling the weight of his memory, the way it no longer crushed her but held her instead. And I think you'd like him. I think you'd want me to be happy. 6 months later, Sunday dinner was served in Calabrese's after the restaurant closed. The tables had been pushed together, and around them sat Luca, Mia, Emma, Vinny, Enzo, and 3 of the women that Mia had helped rescue from Douglas's network. They were rebuilding their lives now, working in Luca's legitimate businesses, living in safe housing, beginning again. Sophia, a woman with quiet dark eyes and hands that were learning to be gentle again, stood to speak. Her voice trembled slightly. 6 months ago, I thought I would die in that warehouse. Mia Reynolds saved my life by being brave enough to speak. Luca Calabrese gave me a second chance. I start college in the fall. The table erupted in applause. Emma clapped so hard her whole body bounced. Luca looked at Mia across the table, and his eyes said everything. This is your legacy, he said to her quietly later, after everyone had left and they were alone in the private booth again. The snow had returned, falling softly against the windows. Not the scars. This. I never asked you, Luca continued, why did you pull Emma into that diner? You had nothing. You could have walked away. Mia answered without hesitation. Because I knew what it felt like to be helpless and scared and alone. I couldn't let her feel that. Not for one more second. Luca reached across the table and took her hand. You saved her on the worst night of my life. And you saved me on mine. We're bound by that. By shared darkness and the choice to step into the light. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life, Luca said softly. Mia smiled. Is that your closing line? It's ours, he answered. They kissed as the snow fell outside, the city glittering beyond the windows, the restaurant quiet and warm, and theirs alone. Douglas Hale sat in a cell, forgotten. Margaret Harrington's empire had become ash. But here, in this moment, two people who had survived the darkest corners of existence had found their way to each other. And that small light, that simple love, was more powerful than all the darkness that had come before. This story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way. If you believe that, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us how this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.